Ladies and gentlemen, taking the opportunity that I have been involved in the NATO's advisory group on emerging and disruptive technologies, I would like to very briefly present the recommendations we came up with in our annual report, which was presented to the NATO Secretary General and NATO's Innovation Board earlier this year. Recommendations were reflected in the NATO's approach towards EDTs in the NATO's coherent implementation strategy for emerging and disruptive technologies, which was endorsed by national defense ministers and accepted by heads of states and governments at the Brussels summit a month ago. The principal aim of the group was to provide allies and NATO with recommendations on how to take action in the adoption of new technologies, considering both long-term goals and concrete steps that could be taken in months rather than years. NATO Advisory Group on Emerging and Disruptive Technologies, to maintain the technological advantage, increase security and NATO defense capabilities, recommended NATO to accelerate the research, development, innovation and application of EDTs along with the capacities and solutions built on their basis and focused on common security challenges. We said that NATO should take a leadership position in the domain of both ideas and actions, create development impulses and shape the strategic directions and capabilities for EDTs in the political, financial, organizational, expert, technical and technological sense. We said that the goal should be to see value added across the whole innovation value chain. And as a part of the One NATO approach, we said that an alliance should establish institutional incentives to spur innovation throughout the military bloc and develop the cooperation with all the interested parties, including like-minded countries, to maintain the technological advantage. In the mid-time frame, NATO should strive to become a pioneer in radical EDTs innovations for multi-domain application faster than its adversaries. The model we presented suggested that NATO has a platform which would help shape a common strategic vision and forecast assess required technological capabilities. And what has been noted is the need to engage all the relevant stakeholders in this process. We called it a triple helix model. So the cooperation between the governments, academia and private sector, including startups, so that new technologies can be effectively developed and implemented, and as a result, the allied industrial base grows in strength. NATO needs to construct an effective collaboration with startups. This is main takeaway and recommendation, and create an ecosystem where innovation can possibly happen at the pace that the pressures of dynamic technological progress demand, and not to be slowed down by procedures. We said that this complex ecosystem should be open also for non-traditional suppliers and venture capital. We also highlighted the need to increase the flow of both new digital capital, so data, and traditional capital, money, and to strengthen the cooperation on EDTs between the allies, but also between decision makers from military and political structures of the alliance. Advisory group recommended the formation of an equivalent of DARPA, so Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The group presented a proposal for a model with an executive body known as NATO Advanced Technology Project Agency, which would be tasked with supporting capital-intensive and high-risk new ventures with significant uses in security and defense by coordinating them and managing the innovation processes within both NATO structure and its surroundings. And then ultimately, NATO leaders at the Brussels summit decided to set up Diana, and it was already presented by David Van Wil, Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges. So I will not present the details of Diana presented already. The member states who are engaged in actual technology projects should work towards achieving the spillover effect at the country level in terms of market creation of EDTs development and improving their innovative ecosystems using the best practices and network effect. It was also said by the report. We also mentioned that NATO needs to introduce changes at each organizational level in all dimensions of its activity, from the strategic to the tactical and technical perspectives. Experts have noted that to adopt the technological revolution, the change in innovation culture is necessary. First and foremost, a creative and experimental approach is a must. We also said that this effort should be coordinated at all levels of the member states' engagement within NATO. So I think that this is good as a summary to start the panel discussion today. Edward, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Izabela. I hope that everybody can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes. So good morning, everyone. My name is Edward Hunter Christie. I'm a former NATO official and now an independent consultant. I actually worked in the same team as ASG David Van Wil, whom we just heard, on these very issues of technology policy. So without further ado, I'll just dive right in. We have an excellent panel with excellent experts. As we heard before, there's a number of key emerging and disruptive technologies such as AI, autonomy, quantum. There is a sense of urgency to ensure that our nations maintain a technological edge over potential adversaries. We know also that for a number of these generic technologies, like AI is a typical example, a lot of the cutting edge is outside of traditional defense ecosystems. And therefore, as we have heard, allies have agreed to design new mechanisms, in particular the Diana framework, to accelerate technology adoption and to revamp our defense innovation ecosystems. And so our conversation now is aimed at highlighting opportunities and challenges, in particular in the Central and Eastern Europe region. And we have very distinguished panelists. We have Ambassador Peter Bátor, who's Slovakia's ambassador to NATO. We have Mr. Dominik Jankowski, who's the head of the political section of Poland's permanent representation to NATO. And we have Mrs. Ieva Ilves, who is an advisor to the President of Latvia on digital policy. So thank you very much for joining the conversation. I'm simply going to list 4 guiding questions that I have in mind, but of course each panelist should feel free to address any other aspect of this general policy discussion. And after I read out these general questions, I'll simply give the floor to the panelists in turn, each for 5 minutes, and then we'll do a couple of extra rounds. So the first question I'd like to put to our panelists, as they are national representatives, is, are there particular institutions or organizations or structures within your respective countries that you wish to highlight as important potential contributions to the Alliance's common effort? Could be from the academic sector, could be from the corporate sector, or perhaps you already have in place specialized state bodies or independent bodies, for example, in testing and evaluation. You'd like to highlight some examples. Question 2, what opportunities and challenges do you see in building bridges between civilian-oriented innovation efforts and ones devoted to defense? My third question is, are there structural challenges that concern you? For example, access to enough skilled personnel or access to sufficient public or private investment? And fourthly, are there policy challenges or policy obstacles that you think are not yet fully resolved, either at the national level or the NATO level or possibly the EU level? So with those questions given as background, please, Ambassador Bátor, you have the floor.
Much and good morning to everyone. Yeah, that's four quite complex questions, and let me take the freedom of not addressing, just one, but maybe choosing some of the elements of each and every. And I will try in the beginning, maybe to give a perspective from from the Central Europe and from Slovakia. And then, if we have enough time, to also go to the international level. But Central and Central European and Eastern European countries share some similar challenges. Usually, and that was the case of the former Czechoslovakia, and that was also the case for Slovakia, that we have very advanced, we used to have a very advanced defense sector. But after the split up of the Czechoslovakia and the reconstruction of our economy, most of the factories, most of the centers were either restructured, dissolved, or simply, they are not non-existent. However, there is still some capacity. I would call it a new capacity, and some of the companies have survived and tried to create a new environment, which part is also dedicated to research and development. But I have to admit that the traditional industry, especially the defense industry, is not that existent anymore as it used to be, and this also creates several challenges. I mean, and they are coming from. I mean, and why this sector was not rebuilt, but also why there is not so much innovation. And I think that's one of the challenges that the whole region faces as the education system. We now, I mean, if there is a question whether there is lack of resources, the personal one or financial ones, I would say surprisingly, there's always some funds we can use, but there's not always good projects, good startups, or simply we do not have enough good personnel that can supply these companies and startups just to advance. There's been a problem that all the most gifted people are usually leaving the region. Some of them are coming back, but the majority of them is staying somewhere else. And this is very crucial for developing the whole environment, especially in innovations and startups. And this is quite natural. That is like sort of closed environment of the defense sector. Not many people know what this sector really does. There are some prejudices as well, as there are certain people who are simply not willing to be part of this business, regardless that the bigger part of this environment is. It can be used also for civil technologies and innovations, but this is a fact that there's been a sort of myth about this, and even the startups, when they are thinking of what way to take in their development, usually the defense and security is one of the last they think about. Also, there are some challenges linked to the, let's call it administration or bureaucracy, because one of the requirements, if you really want to become part of this environment, is to possess at some stage security clearance, which is not easy. It is quite a complicated issue, especially for the companies. And this is something that also tells people, okay, let's look somewhere else than this one. And that, I mean, all of this results in lack of personnel and good personnel and lack of interest in this sphere. And then the commercial potential. One of the main reasons why also NATO decided to create a new system is that unlike in the past when the defense sector and defense innovations were driven by states, today it is driven by the private sector. But unfortunately, there is many projects where when these projects do not reach the market just because they don't see enough commercial use of their products. And when thinking about their products, and when they look at the, let's say, the security and defense aspects of the product versus the commercial one that could be widely accepted in the market, it's usually the later one that they decide for. And that's why the Diana and the fund should help in this regard, that they would try to fund also activities that are not at the core of their, let's say, market interests. And then one of the from the Central European perspective, we also still feel some sort of distrust and a lack of confidence in the companies coming from this part of Europe. We have some experience that even the best technologies, even the best bits in procurements in international organizations are not always winning, just because there is not enough trust that these technologies would be reliable enough. This is also linked to a sort of closeness of the region traditionally, and we are still fighting with this and struggling that that the companies should reach out more for their counterparts in other part of Europe, or maybe overseas in the United States or Canada. This is something, of course, those that are very active, those that are successful have managed this, but in general, creating links, creating good relationships with their teams somewhere out of the Central Europe is still a challenge, and we hope that the NATO mechanism will provide at least one good tool, another tool that could help in this regard. So. What we need from Central Europe and Central and Eastern Europe is more openness and the ability to forge partnerships, to forge more cooperation, and to make it, I would say, everyday tool for the functioning. Second. Any system that we develop, be it in national states, but especially in international fora, should try to link the personal capacities and capabilities on let's say both sides of Europe, and definitely both sides of the Atlantic. And then one of the very important principles of this new activity, and this is very valid for Diana and also for the new NATO fund, is that it should try to narrow the gap, the technological gap between different parts of the alliance, because this is what will at the end make the whole system of NATO much stronger than if some of the advanced states would just advance more and the others would be just trying to catch up. And then what I also mentioned, one of the things that we really need as a non-discriminating approach. It's in the access to the funds, but it's also in the access, I don't know, in the public procurement. I mean, that should be clear, and there should be no feeling from one part of the alliance that it's still struggling to to win the big competitions, even if they possess the technologies that are sought for by NATO. And then we should not forget and the whole system about the capacity building. That's something that especially in this part of Europe is very much needed, and that is something that would help contribute our startups and our institutions to the overall system. And if I have just in 1 minute, and then I can go into detail in other interventions, on the international fora and the policy principles or the main policy issues that I see as important as first, the awareness. The alliance is doing more, gradually more in the EDTs, and is looking at this as really an integral part of our security, but we don't think there is still enough awareness in the member states, and sometimes even not in the international organizations. This will become very soon a very vital part of our deterrence and defense, but also collective defense as such. Then to take security seriously, and the protection of networks and protection of both the hardware and software. We are still seeing that there is a lot of hesitance to introduce very strict rules and laws that would enable states to take decisions to exclude someone from building the networks or from contributing to systems. And this should not be only the critical infrastructure, but it should be also the other part of important public infrastructure or even the academia. Then it was mentioned the data. It will be very important what policy we take on collecting, processing, and very much important on sharing the data within the alliance and within the international fora we are part of. And then also the sufficient framework, and David, the Assistant Secretary General, has already mentioned that there are activities of some actors that are trying to influence or shape the system in a way that would not suit us at all. So we should be part of this process just to make sure that our interests and the systems we are about to introduce will also form part of the international system or international regime in this field, which is now naturally being created. I would stop there, and then we can go into details later. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. Thanks very much for those remarks. I've taken a few notes. We'll get to some of the key takeaways later. Now I'll simply pass the floor to our next speaker, Dominik Jankowski. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Edward. Good morning, everybody. True pleasure to join you online from NATO HQ today. I will try to follow up a little bit on Ambassador Bátor's intervention. I think when we started to strategize in NATO about why we should be addressing emerging and disruptive technologies, some people in Warsaw started to ask, what's the added value? We do it in the EU. We do it through different channels. So we came up back then, almost 2 years ago, with a list of 3 key takeaways, why it's important to work on those particular issues, innovations through NATO. The first one is obvious, it's transatlantic. I mean, the added value is that we are going to work with US, Canada, Norway, UK, Turkey, so other allies which are not in the EU, but having an enormous capacity, especially with regards to some elements of the emerging technology. Second element, and the key, in fact, element that was important for us is the leveling the playing field. I think bridging the gap between, let's say, Central Europe and Western Europeans on emerging tech was the driving force in our thinking why we should speed up in NATO. Third element, and once again, alluding to what Ambassador Bátor said, deterrence and defense. In the end, through this organization, through the work that we are doing here, we should contribute to our deterrence and defense posture. We know that our competitors and adversaries, they are developing, or they have already developed, substantial emerging and disruptive technologies, which either right now already challenge us or might in the future pose a threat to allies and security. So I think building on those 3 pillars and what's there for Central Europe, we understood that we need to move forward faster. And I think the pace in the last 12 months was extraordinary, also including with the help of you, Edward, and working behind the scenes on the documents. The decisions that we took, the leaders took just 2 months ago in Brussels, are in fact a game changer and for this region. Both Diana and the Innovation Fund will bring us closer to the 3 pillars that I described. So of course, and I'm coming back a little bit to the first question of yours, Edwards. I mean, how we approach that, I think we are currently trying to make sure that we are going to connect the dots between CIF and MIL, between the tools that, frankly, they are apart right now, especially on emerging tech. So first step that we did, of course, the Department of Innovation was created in the MOD, which is an important element. Second, we were starting to look at the structures that we have in Poland and making sure that we can select relevant actors for either accelerator or for other activities within Diana and Innovation Fund. One of those is, I'll give you just an example, and we can discuss it later. It's the Łukasiewicz Research Network, which is one of the biggest networks that's trying to bring both academia, practical institutes, which are testing and developing technologies, with the business end of that equation. And finally, of course, financing is important. So the Polish government set out a Polish Development Fund group, which is funding, among others, startup activities, including in emerging tech. To conclude this first round, and for instance, let me say we have selected for ourselves also like 3 guiding principles that we believe both us, Central Europeans, but also NATO should take on board. We're thinking how to implement those elements. The first guiding principle is that we need to coordinate. The coordinated approach, which basically means that the EDTs have this cross-cutting nature, and there are multiple forums, multiple stakeholders. What we should avoid is duplication of efforts. And of course, we are coming back a little bit to the NATO-EU discussion, which is happening, of course, an important element of that. The same goes for how NATO should approach that. We should avoid stovepiping EDTs discussion, because the worst thing we can do is just do it in a way that from time to time we see in this building. My second point is that this means the EDTs, they have also the continuous elements to it. So whatever elements we believe are the emerging and disruptive technologies right now, 7 that we define, they will probably in a few years' time, they will not be anymore considered emerging. They might be still considered disruptive. And so I think what we need to do is this element of a constant adaptation to the emerging and disruptive challenges, something that I believe NATO has been capable of doing in the last few years. The final element, the final guiding principle is to be inclusive. Inclusive means both elements. Once again, level playing field. So basically making sure that we are trying to bridge the technological gap between Central Europeans, Western Europeans, and our allies on the other side of the Atlantic. And I think Diana and the Innovation Fund offers that opportunity. If well designed and well calibrated, it will give that. Second, which basically means second element of inclusiveness, means pulling resources from non-traditional sectors. So you said it also, Edward, at the beginning. I think the startups, so the whole environment which is designing those emerging techs, which are basically mainly used in the civil sector, they do not understand NATO. They do not understand defense part of the equation. So I think we need to make sure that we are going to overcome this mistrust that exists in a way where we offer transparency in what we do. But at the same time, and I'll put a footnote here and I end with that transparency, we need to be mindful that our adversaries and competitors are also seeing that there are limits to what we can do in a smart manner in a public domain. Over to you, Edward.
Thanks very much, Dominik. Thanks very much for these comments. And I'll give the floor straight away to Mrs. Ieva Ilves. Please, Ieva, you have the floor.
Thank you, Edward. I hope you can hear me. Yes, it's good. And thanks, colleagues, for already quite a bit introducing to this topic. I guess I will give a little bit different angle from where I come from, policy part, and I would like to add a little bit sort of what Edward, you touched upon in some of the questions on this structural concern, policy aspects. And let me dive into this field of emerging technologies in the following way. So one, I would think that it's really, what makes it difficult is the complexity of environment. And that's where we really need to advance the common understanding. And that goes as good as to leadership, to the level of experts, and also to the private sector. Because when we think, what we are defending in digital sort of century, what are the threats? Where are those threats? How they are used? I think that all requires quite a bit of structured way of thinking about the policies, about the environment, about how, this new domain, as we used to say, that now in a NATO we have another domain which is digital. How does that accompany our daily lives, our policies, and the alliance serves for the alliance to achieve its goals? So what I'm thinking is this broader understanding and broader defining where the relevance of the tools on investments and the future projects would be going is extremely important to justify, to understand where we invest, and also to motivate. The colleague just before mentioned the fact that we need to educate VCs, that they understand. It's also that we need to motivate. It's not only that there's a grant and a project that they can explore, but it's really a motivation. Where's that bigger purpose? Where's the innovation or the tool will be serving? So I think we struggle with this complexity. We struggle because it's not only anymore strictly defined defense field. We know that we have finances, that we have critical infrastructure, we have data issues, we have even media field coming into the whole sort of complexity, how one defends country alliance and faces the threats. So I think one is the field to understand, to generate the bigger understanding and actually do a qualitative research and analysis, and being able to present that and discuss. It is all what we need to generate that understanding and leadership, and then a future that would lead to proper actions. Of course, the second thing are the technologies itself, and I think it's really welcoming that that NATO is putting up funds, that the countries are cooperating, and I'm looking forward. Latvia has been doing its part. Also nationally, we have developed quite close. Ministry of Defense has developed, particularly for defense sector, quite close cooperation with industry. We are opening innovation centers that would serve exactly that purpose, where the innovation can be tested, advanced, improved, and where the government or public sector can meet the industry and sort of develop these possible future tools. And then the third, I would also say, the skills, and it was mentioned before that it is some big bridge to gap where we need to advance the skills of our people. And again, speaking of different sectors, not only defense, which is critical that we have that skill in place, not only when the threat appears or there is a crisis, but that actually we are able to prepare that skill ahead. And that, I think, requires quite a bit of cooperation between all member states, and of course also including partner states from where we can learn. I think that is a big challenge. We know from all the logic that any weakest link is the one that immediately leads to that threat, and the threat or vulnerability and the possible vulnerability exploitation. It can be in so many ways. So I think the skills and cooperation between countries where there are more advanced technologies, where there are particular specialization in certain fields, because we know, given how complex is that environment and how many different emerging technologies are appearing, it's clear that we might not be able to be, at least we as a small state, can't be an expert in every of those domains. So the skill set we develop and the ability to share those skills and learn from each other, I think, is very important. So this all again leads back to, I think, my main emphasis is that we need to create a bigger understanding in our political leadership or in any leadership. I think Central and Eastern Europe is very well placed actually to demonstrate and raise that awareness. We have certain geographical locations that kind of we are more used to see those threats, and we are more used to see how all the technologies are exploited in the context of bigger political events. And I think that's where we can add more sort of systematic and data-driven, better analysis and understanding to the whole alliance to see what we can learn from common patterns and the way we can tackle those threats. So I place a lot of hope in the cooperation projects and also those investments that would facilitate that cooperation. And the last but not sort of least and not unimportant, I think the colleagues already mentioned also cooperation with the EU. Again, it goes into the whole field of being efficient how you spend your resources. It's clear that EU is putting a huge amount of investments to digitize and be digitally advanced. I see it constantly that the security is lagging behind. It's not really, constant requirement and strong requirement to build secure and reliable future digital tools. So I think the cooperation between those institutions in the field of digital and in the field of being able to see the threats and build secure solutions or invest in secure solutions it's extremely important. Another domain where we should focus to remain efficient, to be able, again, looking from society and leadership to be accountable and to be able to reach the goal we set with a clear sort of justification, clear understanding, and clear motivation. So that would be sort of more policy part from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ieva. Excellent comments. So I'm just going to very briefly highlight a few points that came out from all of your interventions, and then let's open a second round. And so a few things that I noted down so far. I think you all mentioned the importance of skills development, human capital. I think that's very clear to everyone, including in particular, Ambassador Bátor, you mentioned the problem of brain drain from the region, which is, of course, not a new problem, but apparently it still exists in spite of rising wages in the last maybe 10, 15 years. So I don't know if there's anything to add to that. Maybe there's also national policies that need to be strengthened. I don't know. I leave that open back to the panel. Also mentioned administrative rigidities, like, for example, security clearances. I don't know if it's possible to make progress there. Then another point that came out quite strongly is, in a sense, a lack of due recognition for some of the best performing institutions or companies in the region. There was a call for fairness, for non-discrimination in procurement for companies from the region. So that's obviously important. Of course, as we know, defense procurement is regulated a bit differently as compared to civilian procurement, but nonetheless, clearly a very important point for discussion. Another point that came out, I felt, was the high importance of innovation networks, rather simply than clusters, but networks in particular, that came out. And the question of awareness, specifically there, I was wondering whether speakers would like to break down the awareness challenge a little bit more, since after all, awareness can be at different levels, or lack of awareness can be at different levels and of different kinds. So there's awareness among senior political leaders, of course, but there's also awareness in the media or lack of it, awareness in academia or lack of it, awareness in industry, or awareness among young people who are currently considering whether or not to study further topics. So with that, maybe I'd like to go back to our speakers, and maybe Ambassador Bátor, if you'd like to start.
I'd be happy to. Let me pick 2 points, if I may. On the brain drain, of course, this is a problem.
Excuse me,
yep.
There is no problem, but Edward, I know that you were let in. I'm the host, the moderator. I know that we were let in for your panel about 10 minutes late, but you have already used those 10 minutes, and I'm very sorry, but I must ask all the speakers to limit their answers to this very long question to the maximum of 1 sentence each, because we are very badly behind time. So just please, 1 sentence each. Thank you.
Okay, let me use this 1 sentence, except for this one. brain drain, it does not mean we don't have capacities. We have several very successful companies like the ESAT, which is now developing a whole new campus for research and development and innovations, and this will be probably the center in Slovakia that will be highly developed. We have another company which is US based, but with a Slovak professor on new chips and new processors, and we are going to build probably the fastest supercomputer in Bratislava based on these new chips, and also a new AI center under the auspices of Professor Bielikova, which is a at least European renowned expert on this. And on the awareness, what I meant was there is not enough political braveness. The politicians are not brave or bold enough to introduce strict decisions on controlling our networks and controlling the foreign investments. Simply, we are being too polite to some technologies and some actors that have more interest than just to contribute to our networks.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know when you lost me. I was giving a brief summary of some key points, and then I saw that Ambassador Bátor was speaking, so I don't know what happened and what was missed. Did you hear that? Okay, so Ambassador, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear any of your remarks, but anyway, let's just, yeah. Let's just continue, well, let's continue in order. So Dominik, and then afterwards, Ieva. What I was saying before, I don't know if people were able to hear it. It was just a brief overview of some of the points I'd noted so far regarding the importance of skills development, administrative rigidity such as security clearances, lack of recognition for companies from the region, and the need for non-discriminatory procurement practices, the importance of innovation networks, and I also wanted to know from our speakers whether the issue of awareness is one that should be seen rather as among the political class or the media or academia or industry. Where exactly is the awareness gap? Or it could be in several places. So that's what I was saying before. So Dominik, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Edward. I think there was also an interruption from Krynica, basically giving us a one-sentence summary. So I'll try to stick to the second part of that. So I'll, in one sentence, if I may, I'll say awareness, yes, but also understanding. I think the element that we are lacking is understanding on the civilian side of the military/defense requirements, traditions, and way of approaching things. And the same goes other way around. I think absolutely we lack understanding of how we in the defense bubble, we lack understanding of how the emerging tech, the grassroots companies, those startups are functioning and how they develop. And I think this will be most probably also one of the biggest challenges for our region. Over to you, Edward.
Okay, thanks very much. And Ieva, over to you for further comments on these questions.
Yes, thank you. I guess I will really just briefly add, since I already laid out sort of all my political landscape. I think it is really important to get the leadership and the expertise up so we can make those decisions, because, you know, I think we've done quite a good job or launching the funds and innovation labs and ideas, and I think that's all good, but we really need bold and clear decisions of leadership so these tools become useful. We know where we use them and how we use and what's being applied. Otherwise, those will remain sort of experimental, or, you know, there will be somewhere, but that we're not going to achieve the result we need. So I think it is really extremely important that we keep explaining, we keep looking at it, we keep creating this understanding in political leadership, whether it takes expertise, whether it takes research, whether it takes academia, whether it takes more data. Any of these can be applied, but I think without a clear leadership, we will be struggling with all the other great elements that we are actually putting in place in practice. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ieva. Maybe so one point maybe that I would like to return to then, and I'm sorry, Ambassador, if I couldn't hear, maybe you already discussed this a little bit more, but the issue of fair treatment and of a better recognition for high-performing companies from the region. So I don't know if our speakers would like to elaborate this a little bit. So do you have anything in mind, more specifically, measures that could be taken to ensure that technology companies from the region have the best shot and the best opportunities at participating in relevant multinational projects, be it NATO or otherwise, and how to ensure that? What ways forward do you see, Ambassador?
Well, basically two things. The first one, to stick to the rules that are in place, and usually they work. Although we understand that behind this problems, there's usually a lack of trust in the technology, especially when you have to deliver a very complex system. You tend to rely on big companies with a big history, a long history, rather than to opt for something that may not have been tested into the full. I mean, in practice, although it may perfectly work. And second, it is also on the companies to strengthen their links and the relations with those who will be at the end users of the technologies, and that brings me back to my first remarks, saying that we need more outreach from the region, and to make sure and to enlighten our partners that the technologies we are developing in this region are not less good or less efficient than the other ones. I mean, so that's all about communication, links, and networks.